The Branding Your Business podcast is for small business owners looking to build a customer favorite brand and a value-driven business. From solo shows covering marketing tactics to experts sharing their brand stories, each episode delivers actionable insights for entrepreneurs who want to impact the world. We're sharing how strategic moves and authentic connections can build a profitable business minus the burnout. Tune into the Branding Your Business podcast with me, Praise Santos McKenna of Come Plum, to design a brand your audience adores while building a life you love. Hey friends, welcome back to the Branding Your Business podcast. I'm your host, Praise Santos McKenna, the founder of the branding studio Come Plum. And I have a fellow brander, marketer, all-around great woman here on the podcast with me here today. So let me tell you a little bit more about Emily Jane Sarroff. She is a graduate of architectural design, which I love because we see so many artists coming from different artistic backgrounds. So we'll jump into that in a little bit. She is also a Jay Shetty certified life coach, a business mentor, social media figure, and the host of the Empower with M podcast. As a six-figure business owner, she is redefining what it means to build a brand by merging creative branding with strategic marketing, helping clients find their voice through impactful brand design, and teaching them how to communicate it effectively. In a world where branding and marketing are often seen as separate domains, Emily Jane bridges that gap, emphasizing that true brand design is psychology. It's not just a mood board. It's really understanding your people. It's really about branding is the soul, which we'll get into more. But Emily, I'm so glad you're here with me today. And you all might realize that she is coming to us from, I don't even know the phrase. We don't even say other side of the pond. It's the other side of the hemisphere today. So can you tell us a bit, like, what is your morning routine in Australia? Like, good morning to you. How's it going over there?
It's actually very hot here at the moment. We are on the cusp of summer, or maybe we're already in summer now. I'm not too sure, but it's definitely very warm in the mornings, and the sun is up at like 4:30 a.m. So, unless you have blackout blinds, you're not really getting much of a sleep in. But for me, my morning routine's really looking like waking up around 6 a.m. at the moment, going and sitting either outside in the shade or on the couch and reading a book, doing some journaling, a little bit of a meditation, and then just giving myself, that space to be grounded and eased into the day.
Okay, 6 a.m. I know it's summer, but that's pretty early. What time are we going to sleep then if we're waking up at 6?
I try to go to sleep, or I try to hop into bed between 9 and 10 p.m. so then I can wake up for like 6 a.m. But I mean, look, my partner, he's up at 4:30 a.m. in the mornings because he's in the construction industry. So when it comes to me, getting into the mentality of waking up at 6 a.m., I just remind myself that it's still more of a sleep in than what he gets.
Bless him. Bless him for that 4:30 wake up call. Yeah, I know that my partner also gets up a little earlier and I'm like, okay, bye. And then I have no trouble going back to sleep. I love that you're committed. Like, okay, maybe an hour and a half later, I'll get up and get started. Speaking of beginnings, yeah, you have had quite an interesting journey to get you to the coach, podcast host, marketer, brander you are today. And a lot of it started with your background going to school, studying architectural design, and now you have transitioned to business coach. On the podcast, we talk so much about pivots and people kind of changing and moving things around. Give us a little background of some of those twists and turns on your professional journey.
Yeah, I mean, there for sure have been so many. And I think, if you look at this from a branding perspective as well, your brand is ever evolving because you are ever evolving. And all of those pivots that I've really gone through in my business journey have been because of my own personal development at that point in time, and where that was then redirecting me based off what I was discovering or being guided towards in my self-development journey. So when I was 22 years old, I was studying my Master's of Architecture. And that was the path that I had always had laid out for me since high school. It was like, go get a degree, pick something that's going to be like well paying and set you up for, great growth within the corporate space. And that was the path that I had chosen. And I was literally 6 months away from being completely done with the entire, journey where I had done 4.5 years up until that point. And at that stage, I had really begun to dive deeper into personal development and started to feel this deep misalignment within myself when it came to showing up for my studies. And, we talk about like, if your audience knows the sunk cost fallacy, where, maybe there's a relationship or a career that you've invested so much time, money, and energy into that keeps you stuck in that place that you're in. And I had realized that the sunk cost fallacy had kept me stuck in that degree. It had kept me seeing it through until the end because of the time, the money, and the energy that I had invested into it up until that point. But I was feeling this pull within me where my head was saying, stay in the degree, finish the next 6 months, just get the piece of paper. But my heart was pulling me in a completely different direction. And that feeling became so strong that I actually couldn't avoid it anymore. So it was at that point where I made that decision to just pivot and to just follow that tug that was on my heart and see where it was going to lead me. And so after I made that decision to drop out of my master's and just go all in on figuring out my business, I then also made the leap to actually quit my job in the architecture industry as well, just so I could have the full space to really give this thing that I wanted to try a true shot. And so within just 8 months of going all in on my business, I had hit my very first six figures at the age of 22 years old. So that was really the first major pivot that I went through at that point in my life.
Okay, there's a lot here because a lot of people who listen to the podcast who are attracted to our brand studio, it's part of my life calling to get a lot of women in the corporate world to quit their jobs because there's a lot of these nudges. There are signs, they are warning posts to us like, hey, this isn't your path. And we have a conversation within ourselves. For you, it was like the sunk cost fallacy of like, no, I've already been doing this 4.5 years. I already have a job in this industry. This is like the safe and secure route. And I think a lot of people listening to this are having these conversations in their head right now of like, no, but I've already built a career around this. I've studied this. I've done X, Y, and Z. What were the other conversations going on in your head so our listeners can also self-prescribe like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I'm having this nudge to go to? Were there other conversations or other debates that were going on in the mind of Emily Jane at this point before you decided to quit your job, quit school, and take the leap?
Yeah, I mean, there was so much going on within my mind, but one of the loudest thoughts that I could remember was just thinking, what is going to happen to me if I don't change anything and I continue on this path for another 6 months or another 5 years? What is my reality going to look like? And I remember when I thought about that and I really like visualized into that, even just going on that path for another 6 months was going to be so detrimental to my mental, physical, and emotional health because it was already doing so much damage at that point that I was at where it really was a breaking point for me. And so the idea of staying in that exact same position for another 6 months, like the thought of it getting even worse than it already was just not something that I was willing to risk. And I even would think about my career from the perspective of like 5 years from now, do I see myself in this same position? And when I thought about that, I felt so contracted. I felt like, no, that's not where I want to be. That's not what I want to be doing. I'm not going to feel lit up. I'm going to feel really just trapped in, in this job that isn't actually in alignment with what I want to be doing with my bigger purpose and my greater potential. And so it was really that like visualization that I started to do to really future pace and think about like, what is it going to end up costing me if nothing changes?
That's so good. I hear that there is this evaluation of, okay, think about in the future, what will my life look like if I continue to do this? And I love the spectrum you talked about of will I feel trapped or will I feel lit up? And there are so many spaces, whether it's our relationships, our personal lives, the city that we live in, our careers. Does it light you up? We need more people being in the zone of being lit up and in the zone of what's their zone of genius, what they're called and wired to do. And you had the insight in your early 20s to be like, if I go down this path, I will just feel trapped instead of just bright and shiny and the Emily Jane you are today, which is huge. It's personal development, it's professional development. It's also like self-leadership. Do you see a lot of your story in the clients that you help these days too?
Massively. And I think that's one of the most valuable things about moving yourself through those challenging experiences is the embodied wisdom that you then have, so that when it comes to serving clients who are experiencing similar sort of challenges or maybe the exact same situations or emotions, then you know how to hold that. And you have an understanding of where they're at, which then helps you with being able to actually support them further. There's been many challenges that have come up in this journey across the last 4 years for me. And every time a new challenge comes, I welcome it. And I always ask myself, like, what is the opportunity in this experience? And how is this here for me to actually expand and become better at handling the hard times, so that then when it comes to supporting and serving my clients, I'm fully equipped and have that embodied wisdom to be able to help guide them through that as well.
100%. Yeah, that lived wisdom that you can pass on. It's really interesting because I also work as a business coach. I've had business coaches before, but a business coach and life coach, they're different. And yet there's a lot of a Venn diagram with those skill sets. Can you tell us a little bit about your niche of the people that you help coach and how it's like, okay, I'm going to help you with your branding and marketing and business. I'm also going to help you a little bit with your life since you have training in both. How do those things overlap? Like, without sharing too many confidential stories, can you give us examples of how those things come together?
For sure. Yeah. See, when I first started my business, I was mindset coaching, and that's really lent into getting my life coaching certification. But I'm so glad I had that experience, like you said, because it integrates so well with being a business coach. And I think one of the biggest examples that I see come up in different forms, but at the core of it, it's the same thing, is new business owners coming into the entrepreneurial space and becoming so dysregulated because the pressure or the stress or the way that they're having to bridge such a big knowledge and skill gap in order to get to that next level. And so where my skills as a life coach really come in handy when it comes to business coaching is being able to actually support clients through that and help them recognize where they're dysregulated and why they're dysregulated, and then really guide them back to that place of being grounded so that then they can start to think logically about their business again. Because one mistake that I think a lot of women, especially because we're very emotional beings, when women first step into the business space, they're too much in their emotional mind because that's what's natural for us. But business really is a logical game. And yes, there is an element of emotion to it when it comes to creativity and, of course, the way you want to feel in your everyday. But in order to problem solve in your business, you can't be thinking with emotion. You have to be thinking with logic. But when you are dysregulated, you're not able to think logically because you're too much in your emotional head. And so that's where I find that my skills come most in handy, is when those new business owners who are working with me experience that intense dysregulation for the very first time, and they really start to go in like this flight, fight, or freeze mode, really being able to bring them back to that grounded place so that they can logically find a solution to moving forward.
Yeah, fight, flight, freeze, self sabotage mode. Like, I see these patterns
Yeah.
happening over and over, and it's completely normal for those who are listening because, as Emily said, when you are venturing into entrepreneurship, especially those first few years, I'm a decade in, I still get this every time we're launching something new.
Yes.
Change is scary. Change causes us to dysregulate. And I totally hear what you're saying. Like, we need the part of us that is emotional. Please don't separate it, but we need the heart and the mind to work together. Heart, body, mind, and soul to work together. And so it sounds like to have someone like you in their corner to be like, hey, let's regulate ourselves first before we make any rash decisions about our business, before we let the emotions be the driver. We have to be really mindful of who's in the driver's seat. They can be co-pilot, but are we really putting our logical mind at the forefront, or at least in partnership with the emotional mind? But when we are in emergency mode, it's really hard to think about it, or when we're dysregulated, as you said. What other obstacles do you see in a pattern amongst your clients besides dysregulation that you've been able to coach people through to get them from, again, that trapped phase to that lit up phase?
Yeah, I'd say the other big thing that comes up, which in a way is related, but we can speak into it more on its own, is that element of bridging the knowledge and skill gap. Now, when you come into the business space, let's say you're a coach, let's say you're a mindset coach, you're stepping into the coaching space because your skill is in mindset coaching. You want to make an impact through helping people elevate their mindsets and transform. But in order to do that, you must also wear the hat of the marketer, of the brand strategist, of the salesperson, of the financial strategist. You've got to wear all of the different hats in your business. And that is something that is such a massive knowledge and skill gap that new business owners have to bridge, and also a mindset shift, right? Because they're coming in with this mentality of, I want to do this thing, but now they're having to do this long list of things. And so one thing that I really focus on with my clients is helping them practice patience with the process of actually being a beginner in all these different areas, and really breaking down into a, really tangible step-by-step process for them to actually be able to bridge those knowledge and skill gaps and compound the skills they need to then get to that point where they see the results in their business. So that would be the other core area, I'd say.
Wait, so I'm not just going to know everything immediately when I become an entrepreneur? Is that what you're telling me?
Definitely not.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't know why we are so hard on ourselves to be an expert at everything overnight. We have to remember that we are beginners, we are learning, we have to walk before we run, or we even have to learn rules before we break them. And yet, I don't know why we put ourselves on these high pedestals at some point where we're like, no, I need to know this now. I need to know this immediately, instead of allowing ourselves to make mistakes. And it's so good to have a friend, a coach, an entrepreneur bestie to be like, hey, we just learned these things. We have this skill set. Yeah, maybe you are a mindset coach, but because we're a business owner, now we wear 50 bajillion hats. And I don't expect us to know all the skill sets for all the 50 bajillion hats. And that is such a good reminder, which, I mean, you have so many probably innate skill sets, but what were the things, just to humanize the goddess that is Emily Jane? What are the ways that you took baby steps to go from like, okay, well, I know a lot about making buildings, and now I'm going to help people with their life and business choices. Can you tell us, what does plans look like? Does it mean like having a course, having a mentor? What did that look like for you?
It looked like a whole range of different things for me. On one level, like when I made the decision to go all in on my business, I also made the decision to invest my $10,000 that I had in savings as my security blanket. I decided to invest that into a coach, a business coach specifically, who had the blueprint for me, because I knew where my strengths were and where my weaknesses were. I knew that I am a very creative person. I knew that I've got the courage to put myself out there and just give whatever a shot. I knew that I was willing to take messy action and just run really, really fast. But then I also knew that there was this big knowledge gap that I had around, hang on, how do I actually find clients? How do I actually sign clients? How do I actually have a sales conversation with someone? Because I'd never experienced any of that before. So I got really clear on what my strengths were. And then I made sure that I found someone who complemented that, someone who really filled the gaps for me of where I wanted to be growing and where I wanted to be expanding my knowledge and skill set. And a big thing that I mentioned in there as well is taking messy action. Don't come into the business space and think it has to be perfect before I launch, or my content has to be perfect before I post it, or my branding has to be absolutely executed to the absolute planned out T before I can start integrating it into my social media. If you have that mentality, that's your perfectionism coming up as a actual smoke screen for a deeper fear that you have, right? And that's actually a form of self-sabotage in itself. You want to be taking messy action at no matter what point you're at in your business journey, because the messy action allows you to actually fail faster. So it's okay if you post something and you post something wrong, because you're then going to learn quickly, okay, that wasn't the right thing. Let me quickly course correct, instead of waiting to perfect and perfect and perfect before posting, and then discovering that the thing didn't work. And now you're at that same point, but it's just taken you a lot longer to get there. So when I was a beginner, and even now in my business journey, I've always embodied that mentality of taking messy action and just leaning in and trusting myself that I will figure it out. So that self-trust piece is so massive as well if you do want to be growing a business at hyper speed.
Yes, making mistakes. How can we make that normal and actually praiseworthy of like, oh, great, you made a mistake. Like, way to go. This is huge. I also want to back up and applaud you. I didn't hire a business coach until I was like 7 years in business because I was that person that I was like, no, I'm going to like learn everything on my own. I'm going to YouTube University. Like, this is going to be fine. And so I do want to say you are gifted in that you knew yourself enough to know I'm going to need help. I'm going to need people in my corner. Again, what you said, not every business coach is for every person. You have to know your strengths and you have to know your weaknesses to find that person who's going to complement you. So please check out Emily's work if you want to hire, even check out us. Like, I will refer people to other business coaches because I'm like, I'm not the right fit for you. This person is too, because this is what you're looking for. And a good coach will tell you when they're not a good fit for you. But it sounds like the person who is in your corner was the right fit for you and really helped you where you were today, which you are such a good person at creating spaces that also kind of blend this sense of mentorship and also a sense of fun. So can you tell us a little bit about Mentors and Mimosas? Girl, I love a good alliteration. So empower with mentors and mimosas. There's a theme here. Tell us a little bit about that gathering and also about other mentors in your life that have made a difference.
Yeah, so for me, Mentors and Mimosas is an entrepreneurs networking evening that I've created to really create a space for business owners to get offline and come in person to actually feel that connection. Because something I've found in my last 4 years of business is that the online space can get pretty lonely, and it can end up being you're sitting in an office all day, every day, staring at a computer screen. Sure, there's connections on social media and on Zoom and on podcasts like this, but like it lacks that physical connection. And I'm such a big person for feeling other people's energy, being a hugger, like being able to give someone a big squeeze. And so that's why I wanted to create that event. And it's actually grown extremely rapidly over the last 8 months here in Australia, where it's one of the fastest growing entrepreneurs events on the Gold Coast right now. And I really do believe that comes down to the attention to detail that I've really put in when it comes to building out that brand and creating an experience for people. So a visual, a sensory experience that goes beyond just, the seat that they sit in. It's everything, every aspect that's come into play from the moment they've stepped into that room, and from the connections they're having, the foods they're eating, the sounds they're hearing, the lighting they're seeing, and all of that. So it's really, for me, like as a creative and as someone in the branding space as well, that's just become like an expression of my own creativity, which I absolutely love. And it very much, me stepping into the events space has very much been inspired by mentors that I've worked with also, who are really leading in the events space. And that being in proximity to people like that brought me back to one of my foundation pieces of my vision that I first stepped into the business space with, which was being on stages, making an impact, sharing my voice, being in person, feeling that energy in a room. And so that's really what brought me around to stepping into that this year.
Congratulations. That's huge. It started 8 months ago. It's already one of the top entrepreneurial events there on the Gold Coast. Like, let's celebrate that. That is a big deal. That is really fun. An interesting question popped into my mind because my friends who are architects understand spaces, they understand buildings, understand homes, and events, honestly, branded events that are in person also bring in some of that same knowledge. Did any of your architectural background helped you with some of these Mentors and Mimosas events?
I think massively, because the way that I was trained to think as an architectural designer was the experience that someone has, the flow through a space, the way that, people move and elements interact and have an effect on the user's experience. Like, even to the point where one big concept that we learnt in architecture school was, bringing inside and outside spaces together. And, how can we connect the space that's outside of the window with the space that's inside of the room? And so just having like these extra, the depth of understanding of spatial arrangement and the way that humans actually use a space, I feel like that's really been able to come through in the events that I run, which has made it such a standout experience, because so many other events that I've attended, there's this large element of user experience that's missing because they don't understand to the same depth that I do the way that people actually interact with spaces and the psychological influence that different design elements in a space has on the user's experience as well.
Ugh, that is so good. Again, to your point on the online space, it's great. You can do so much, you can have a broad reach. But folks are really craving in-person opportunities. So we're not telling folks you have to open like a brick and mortar store, but could you host an event? Could you bring your brand in person so you can give people a high five and a hug? And these tips of just like, okay, if you're bringing them into a physical space, people have studied this for years, for eons, for decades, for centuries. How can you make that experience? Again, we are of the earth. How could you bring the earth into, stale warehouses? How can we bring both together? You all need to check out her Instagram and just see the vibe and the feel. And of course, if you're in the Gold Coast, please visit one of these events too. But I love these connections, and I love that you're bringing your creative mind to it. And I know that creativity and communication and creative communication is one of your big pillars. Tell us about your approach. I mean, it could be architectural, it could be anything. When it comes to creative communication, what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, so for me, this is a concept that I've really been playing with the more that I begin to niche down what it is that I do and what it is that I specialize in. And, with my creative background in architecture, but then also like as a hobby, I'm an artist. And that's something that's always been such a natural gift for me. I feel like I've always been able to create or communicate through what I'm creating without necessarily using words. And so this is where, as a brand designer and a marketing expert, now I help my students in particular understand how they can leverage design elements to actually communicate what they want to be communicating without necessarily speaking. So through visuals or through the way that something is laid out and structured, or through the unconscious feeling that someone receives from what it is that you're putting out there. So when I talk about creative communication, that's largely what I'm speaking about. Is sure, there's an element of actual communication through your copy, which falls into this as well, but largely it's the nonverbal communication, how you utilize design to actually communicate something deeper and really have your brand and your message anchored in further for your audience without necessarily needing to speak.
You're speaking to the brand studio owner heart of mine too. I'm like, yes, we need more people saying this, because intellectually we know that there's the words we speak, but nonverbal communication goes a long way, right? This is even why we're a video podcast, because we want that extra layer of body language. But this is also why we do graphic design on some of our reel covers. Like every single design element, more visuals, more sound, more sensory experiences, add to the user experience, add to the memorableness of a brand. If there were two simple tips you could tell someone, because you and I could talk, and I feel like as creatives, we get it. Like, okay, of course we understand negative space. Of course we understand blending nature and the insight, but this does not come naturally for people. If you think about your clients or the people who are just venturing into the entrepreneurial space, if they were to take two key takeaways about their creative communication, again, they're wearing a million hats as a business owner. Are there two go-to design teachings we could teach in like a minute or less that could really like blow people's mind and really propel their marketing and branding forward?
Yeah, so there's two things I'll speak to. The first thing is about design planning. And then the second thing, in case I forget it so you can remind me, the second thing is going to be about creating the space to actually be in your creative zone. So I think the very first thing that you should be doing for yourself, like as a business owner, is actually planning out and starting to create a concept for what you do want your brand to be. And a lot of people skip the concept phase and just try to dive straight into building out a brand, and just build out the full brand kit without actually doing the brainstorming, doing the mind mapping, doing the reflecting. So if you're feeling stuck and you're like, I don't really have like a clean, clear, and cohesive brand, then go back to square one of actually starting to brainstorm what is the brand that you have in mind? What are the feelings? What is the values? What is the message, the mission? What is the emotions that you want your audience to experience? What is the aesthetic? Aesthetic is a big element of that. What are the colors, or what are the imagery that's really coming up for you? And start to actually brainstorm this. I love to do branding brainstorms. I always start out mind mapping it first and doing a bit of like a brainstorm with my clients in that sense. Then I always transition that into Pinterest and collate like a visual representation of what's coming up for them. And then from there, it's about taking both of those two things you've created and starting to merge it into more of a clear plan. So that would be the first pointer for you, is to go through that brainstorming and conceptualization process first. And then that second point that I mentioned is actually creating a space for you to be in your creative zone. So many people don't set themselves up to be in their creative energy. And so let's think of it this way, right? Let's say you're very much in your logical head all day. You're at your 9 to 5 job. You're doing the computer work. You're doing the logical thinking. You come home after 9 hours of work. You're exhausted, but you sit down and now you're like, okay, I need to create a piece of content, or, oh, I need to design a graphic. And you're like, why is this not working? Why can I not think of what I want to be transmitting into this piece? The reason is because you're still stuck in your logical mind. You need to actually learn how to switch between the different sides of your brain, between the logical and the creative. And so having a buffer window between activities, or before you do anything creative, so that you can actually create that switch for yourself. And that could be as simple as going and sitting outside. That could be doing a meditation. That could be listening to some music that gets you in your creative zone, or dancing around and moving your body. Anything at all to really break the logical state that you're in and begin to shift you more into that feminine, flowy, creative part of your mind. And if you can do that and create intentional space for that before you sit down and start to do any designing or any conceptualizing, or even just any brainstorming of something you want to bring into your world, then that's going to make such a massive difference with being able to experience that creative flow and actually receive those downloads or come up with those creative ideas with much more ease.
This is so good. So it really is having design plans, like really thinking about your brand foundations, like what is your mission, vision, and values? Who are the people you really want to impact? What is your story? What is the thing you want people to experience? I know we have a few resources on the podcast, earlier episodes, but Emily is actually very graciously sharing with us a resource, and we'll put it in the show notes, but there's a brand and marketing training. And so please check that out too. But yes, it's this design planning, and then actually setting yourself up for success to be able to do it. You did such a good job of explaining that. Again, we are so hard on ourselves that, okay, I'm going to work a 9 to 5 and then immediately come home and then create this magnetic brand and content, but I'm completely drained. I have no more creative calories in me. And so you are saying, just make the transition, get your body, mind, heart, soul in the right place. It also sounds just like a lot of self-care that we have to do for ourselves first before we can even pour out, before we can then create this experience for others. We cannot pour out of empty vessels, but having our cups filled, having ourselves full really makes a difference. And I know that we talk about this a lot on the podcast because I know that people try to separate a lot of their personal life from their professional life, but we are one person, and hopefully an integrated person, and that can be for the best, but that can also be really tough. So we're going to go into a few deeper topics here. And Emily Jane is such a vulnerable, authentic person and shares a bit about her story when she was starting her entrepreneurial journey, like really taking these bold risks, putting herself out there. She also found herself in a domestic violence relationship, which is more common than I imagine and more common than I hope for it to be. But can you tell us about how your experience in a DV relationship and even where you are now, how you've grown as a leader and as a survivor, how that has affected you and the work and your personal life today?
Yeah, massively. And there's so much that we can go into from this. But the first point that I will touch on, which is connected to what we were just talking about, creativity. That window of time, that almost 2 years that I was in that relationship, I was so disconnected from my creativity. And the reason for that, which I only learned after coming out of that relationship, was because I was stuck in a survival state. And when you're stuck in a survival state, you're actually unable to tap into that part of yourself where creativity exists. And so, one thing that I would ask our listeners, right, and you don't necessarily need to be in a DV relationship to resonate with this, but where in your life right now do you feel that maybe you're falling into a bit of a survival state? Maybe there's a lot of stress you're experiencing at work or at home or somewhere else, and that is really causing you to lose that connection with your creative power because of that state of survival that you're in. Get clear on where that is showing up for you in your life right now and what that may look like, and start to put some practices in place to really bring yourself back to that regulated place. And I've done so much nervous system regulation work since coming out of that relationship, because obviously that like dysregulated me, right? And so for me, like in all of that nervous system regulation work I've done, I've slowly come back to myself, come back into my body. And now that's where I'm able to really create from this place that I create from in my business right now. So that's the first little point that I would want to touch on there. But one thing that I did notice across that window of time was that when your relationships are draining you, you are not going to be able to show up for your business, and your business is not going to thrive. And one thing I've learned, especially now being in a healthy relationship with a new partner, is when my relationships are thriving, my business is thriving as well. And so for so long, I felt like I was just surviving. I was just treading water. I was just trying to maintain within my business because that's what was happening within my personal world as well. I didn't have the capacity to grow. I didn't have the capacity to scale because, like I said, I was treading water. I was trying to survive. So again, if you ever feel yourself kind of treading water in your business, like I would really urge you to take a look at other aspects of your life that maybe could be influencing that as well. You know, even if there's just relationships that you're neglecting in your personal life because you're so focused on achieving a certain goal or milestone within your business, really checking in with that, because that has been one of the biggest lessons for me from that whole experience, and really learning that I need to walk away from the things that do put me in that kind of state. I need to walk away from the things that prevent me from standing in my true power or leaning into my fullest potential. And in the past, when I was in that relationship, I didn't know how to walk away. You know, I didn't know how to walk away from those things. And so there was a big learning experience that came from me from that, in being able to do so.
Yeah, that is huge. Thank you so much for sharing a bit of that story. There's so much that affects our lives. And this goes back to what you were saying before, that it doesn't have to be a DV relationship. Where else are you in survival mode, or where else are you in fight, flight, or freeze, right? Where does your body feel nervous or stuck or wants to run away? Because how can you show up creatively if your body's just trying to survive? If you truly think about it, if you look into psychology, when that part of the brain is activated, it shuts down the other parts of the brain. Our brain needs to feel safe, love, and secure so we can talk to the audience that we want to serve. And I am so happy that you're in a secure, healthy relationship now. And bless him, again, he's waking up at 4:30, people. This is someone who is like dedicated and responsible. We're into that. When we see that contrast of just like, I can come from a secure attachment, I can come from a healthy place, and I can show up for the people I serve. I can show up for this brand and new creative ways, because your mind and heart, they feel safe and they can reach these new levels too. And so it could be a relationship, it could be a work relationship, or to your point, it could be neglect. What if you haven't spent enough time with yourself? What if you haven't let yourself listen to music that you wanted to listen to for fun, and that puts your body and mind in that survival mode because you're always pushing and pushing and pushing? And I will let you know if you all are out here listening to this podcast, it's the Branding Your Business podcast, and we talk a lot about making memorable, lovable brands. We also have to create that feeling within our businesses ourselves for people to want to remember us, to want to love us. So do you feel good in the brand you're creating? Do you feel safe in what you're creating? Are the people you're hiring also feeling safe and secure too? But what happens if you do all the business tactics and you make it there and you're successful, but you become the kind of person that you don't like in the process? Who are you becoming in this process while you're also making this brand? It's not either or. I really encourage you all, as you're listening, it's both. We need to be doing the work in both. We want to see thriving businesses because hopefully it means thriving individuals, which means thriving communities. And we need to see more of that too. So thank you so much for sharing and continuing to be open and encouraging us that, even if we're in tough survival situations, there is another side. There is another side where you can feel creative and fun again. We are going to wrap our session with a fun game. Speaking of fun, I love being able to learn, going deep, doing all these things, but I also, in my dream world, I want to make our show do you all watch Jimmy Fallon in Australia, or is that just a here thing?
I don't think it's on TVs here, but YouTube.
YouTube. Well, those talk show hosts that really just have a variety show. That's my dream. I just want to have a variety show with fun games. We're going to have to find out how to do this better on the podcast, but we've been playing this game, especially with people in branding who have good word associations. And so, for example, if I said the word well-rounded, some people will say Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep is so well-rounded, And so it could be anybody. It could be a celebrity. It could be a brand. It could be an entity. But we're going to play the game. There's no wrong answers here, Emily Jane. Are you ready?
Oh gosh, here we go. Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, buckle your seatbelt, sister. Okay, first word, magnetic.
Magnetic. The person that's coming up for me, and it's so funny, my head's in superhero mode. Doctor Strange just came up for me.
Doctor Strange, we love it. Magnetic character for sure. Okay, this is a word that's also kind of a person, but I mean it as a word. Swift.
Oh, I don't want to say Taylor Swift just because that's her name. I'm going to say Nike.
Yes. Okay, we love running. We love that. Another one, disruptor.
Oh, okay, Andrew Tate came up for me for that because of how disruptive his brand can be.
Yo, you want some hot takes. There it is. That's so good. Okay, another word, unordinary.
Oh, Apple, the brand Apple.
Yeah, I could see that just black background, white font, unordinary, period.
Yeah.
That's them. Yes.
That's it. Just in the clean Mac font.
In that clean Helvetica, girl, you get it. Okay, another one, wicked.
Ooh, Wicked. Funny because, again, I'm just thinking of the movie Wicked right now because it's been at top of my mind as something that I want to see. But if I was to go beyond that, I'd probably say, if I'm thinking of brands, Red Bull, the energy drink.
Okay, love that. Love that. It's hard not to think of wicked. I'm am I thinking of this word, or has this movie incepted me? Okay, last one, leader.
Oh my gosh, that's so egotistical of me. But as soon as you're leader, I'm oh, me!
Emily Jane Sarroff. That's who.
I've been doing so much work on leadership the last 12 months. That has literally been my core focus. And I feel where I am now versus the start of the year, I'm embodying that leader that I wanted to be. So that's funny that was the thing that came up.
Not egotistical, sis. Name it, claim it. She is a leader, people, which a lot of folks will want to connect with you further because they are going to love the way you lead listening to this podcast. How can our listeners find you?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on Instagram. That's where I'm the most active. I'm at Empower with M. And then if you do want to just listen to my podcast, which has been active since literally before I started my business, you can go back and listen to 22-year-old M going through the thick of it, making that decision to transition on the Empower with M podcast.
So good. Well, thank you for sharing space with us. And for those who are just listening to the audio, you need to be watching this video. She has a wind blowing in her hair so gently right now. This goddess sharing space with us on this podcast. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It was so lovely to connect with you.
Same to you. I absolutely loved this conversation.
Do you ever feel like you wear so many hats as a small business owner? I totally get that. Here at Come Plum, we want to keep you in your zone of genius, how you serve and show up for people. In a collaborative way through brand coaching, we help you define your brand foundations, your brand strategy, and your brand expression, all that fun stuff like logo, websites, videos, photos, and more. If you go to comeplum.com and mention in the contact form that you heard about us through our Branding Your Business podcast, you get cool perks like an extra hour of coaching or maybe even 10% off your coaching package. We can't wait to collaborate with you to build a brand that you and your clients love.